There exists a particular kind of confidence that isolates just as effectively as insecurity. While most people struggle with self-doubt, with the fear that they're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough, there exists a subset of the population, and specifically a subset of INTJs, who rarely experience this paralyzing uncertainty. They make decisions without second-guessing. They recover from failure without existential crisis. They pursue their vision without constantly questioning whether they deserve to. They operate with an unshakable self-assurance that most people find either inspiring or deeply alienating. These are the INTJ-As, the assertive architects, and their psychological landscape is profoundly different from what most people assume about confidence. Most culture frames confidence as straightforward. Secure people feel good about themselves, uncertain people don't. But the reality is far more complex. The INTJ-A doesn't just feel confident. Their entire cognitive and emotional system is organized around certainty. They don't just believe in themselves. They operate from a place where self-doubt is functionally irrelevant to their decision-making process. This creates something unexpected, a form of isolation that nobody discusses. Because while the world celebrates confidence, rarely does anyone talk about what confidence does to connection, to empathy, to the ability to receive feedback, to the capacity for genuine vulnerability with others. Today, we're exploring the psychology of the INTJ-A, not just what makes them tick, but why their unshakable confidence, rather than connecting them to the world, often separates them from it. To understand the INTJ-A, one must first understand what the A actually means in their personality. It's not simply confident. It's a fundamental shift in how the cognitive system processes stress, failure, and self-evaluation. The assertive trait operates at the level of identity, how the person relates to their own competence, how they metabolize external criticism, how they recover from setbacks, and most importantly, where their self-assurance originates. The INTJ-A's self-assurance comes from internal conviction. They trust their introverted intuition and extroverted thinking to generate accurate conclusions about the world. When they reach a decision through their NITE process, they don't experience lingering doubt about whether that decision is correct. Their confidence isn't based on external validation. It's based on faith in their own cognitive apparatus. This creates what psychologists call low dispositional anxiety, a baseline state where the INTJ-A simply doesn't activate stress responses the same way others do. While many personality types experience persistent background anxiety about whether they're doing things correctly, the INTJ-A's brain doesn't naturally generate this signal. When failure occurs, and it does occur, the INTJ-A's response is categorically different from others. They don't internalize the failure as evidence of personal inadequacy. Instead, they analyze it as data. What went wrong? What pattern did I miss? What needs to be adjusted? The failure becomes information to incorporate into future strategic thinking, not evidence that they themselves are flawed. This isn't positive thinking or denial. This is a genuinely different way of processing feedback, where someone else might think, "I failed," which means I'm not good enough. The INTJ-A thinks, The execution was inefficient. Here's how I optimize for next time. The failure is external and solvable. The self remains untouched. This architectural difference extends to decision-making. The INTJ-A decides and acts with minimal internal deliberation. They synthesize their NI patterns and TE logic, reach a conclusion, and move forward. The paralysis of constant second-guessing simply doesn't occur naturally in their psychological system. But here's where the psychology becomes more complex. This confidence isn't equally distributed. INTJ-As tend to have extremely high confidence in domains they've developed expertise, and this expertise-based confidence bleeds into a more general assumption that if they don't understand something, it's likely because that thing isn't worth understanding or isn't complex enough to warrant serious attention. The INTJ-A experiences a form of loneliness that others rarely recognize. It isn't the loneliness of being misunderstood, it's the loneliness of not needing to be understood. Because the INTJ-A's self-assurance doesn't depend on external validation, they naturally separate themselves from others' approval or disapproval. They make decisions independently, rarely seeking input. They trust their judgment over others' expertise. They move forward without consensus, without agreement, without the small confirmations that most people use to navigate social reality. This independence, while psychologically sustainable for them, creates distance. Most human bonding occurs through reciprocal vulnerability, the mutual exchange of doubt, uncertainty, and need for reassurance. When one person simply doesn't experience that vulnerability, a crucial bridge for connection is missing. Consider what happens in a professional or personal relationship. Most people bond through shared uncertainty. I'm not sure if this is the right approach. What do you think? This question creates an opening for collaboration, consensus building, mutual influence. The INTJ-A rarely asks this question because they've already reached a conclusion through their internal analysis and they trust that conclusion. Other people experience this as exclusion, not hostile exclusion, but systematic removal of the channels through which humans typically create connection. The INTJ-A isn't trying to isolate themselves. Their confidence architecture simply doesn't require the feedback loops that most people use to build intimacy. The INTJ-A becomes the person who seems to have everything figured out, who never needs anyone's help, who makes decisions confidently while others remain uncertain. This can look like leadership, but it often reads as cold distance. What makes this paradox acute is that confidence is theoretically supposed to make someone more attractive, more powerful, more connected. But for the INTJ-A, their particular brand of confidence, rooted in internal certainty rather than external achievement, can make them simultaneously admired and isolated. Every psychological strength creates a shadow, and the INTJ-A's unshakable confidence casts a long one. The first shadow is intellectual arrogance. When an INTJ-A encounters disagreement, their highly confident system interprets it not as alternative perspective, but as inadequate thinking. They don't experience the self-doubt that might make them genuinely consider that they could be wrong. They experience certainty, and certainty tells them they're right and the other person is simply operating from inferior analysis. This creates what psychologists call confidence bias, the mistaken belief that their lack of anxiety about a decision indicates the decision's correctness, rather than simply indicating their personality architecture. An INTJ-A presents an idea in a meeting. A colleague raises a concern. The INTJ-A's response isn't, "Let me genuinely reconsider whether this concern is valid." It's rapid analytical dismissal of the concern's logical foundation. Not out of intentional malice, but because the INTJ-A's NITE has already processed this possibility and dismissed it as less optimal than their original strategy. Over time, colleagues stop raising concerns. They stop offering alternative perspectives. They stop trying to influence the INTJ-A because they've learned that their input won't be genuinely weighted. It will be analyzed and found wanting. The second shadow is inflexibility disguised as principle. The INTJ-A's confidence in their logical analysis translates into conviction that their conclusions are correct. What looks like holding firm to principles is often refusing to genuinely reconsider based on new information because I've already reached the optimal conclusion. An INTJ-A decides on a strategic direction. New data emerges that contradicts part of that strategy. Rather than genuinely pivoting, the INTJ-A reinterprets the new data through their existing framework, finding reasons why their original direction remains optimal. This isn't dishonesty, it's confidence-based pattern completion, where the INTJ-A's NI synthesizes data in ways that confirm their original analysis. The third shadow is emotional insensitivity masquerading as logic. Because the INTJ-A doesn't naturally generate high anxiety or self-doubt, they genuinely don't understand when others are overwhelmed. When colleagues are stressed or uncertain, the INTJ-A's response is logical analysis. Here's the problem, here's the solution, execute it. What's missing is recognition that others need permission to feel uncertain, need time to process emotion, need to be met in their vulnerability before they can move forward. During crises when others are panicking, the INTJ-A remains calm and analytical. This can look like leadership. But to the people experiencing panic, it often reads as cold, as dismissive of their fear as something beneath serious engagement. The INTJ-A thinks, their fear is irrational and distracting me from problem solving. Others feel, my fear isn't being taken seriously by someone I need support from.
The INTJ-A's greatest advantage is their stress resilience. While many personality types experience stress as physiological upheaval, racing heart, impaired thinking, emotional dysregulation, the INTJ-A's assertive trait means stress doesn't trigger these responses as intensely or as persistently. This is real neurological advantage. When other people are overwhelmed and confused, the INTJ-A remains clear and strategic. They can focus on solving problems while others are still processing emotion. They can make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by anxiety about consequences. In crisis situations, in high-stakes decision-making, in environments where clarity is required, the INTJ-A thrives. This is why so many INTJ-As find themselves in leadership positions. They have an actual neurological advantage in high-stress environments. But this same resilience creates a fundamental empathy gap. The INTJ-A simply cannot genuinely viscerally understand what it's like to be overwhelmed by anxiety, to be paralyzed by self-doubt, to experience the emotional disorganization that other personality types experience regularly. When an INTJ-A tells someone who is anxious to just think logically about this, they're not being intentionally dismissive. They're offering advice from their actual experience. They genuinely solve problems by compartmentalizing emotion and focusing on logic. It works for them. but it dismisses the reality that other people's nervous systems literally don't work that way. This creates a particular cruelty. The INTJ-A's greatest strength, resilience under pressure, becomes the source of distance from people who don't share that strength. They can't understand why others don't just handle stress the way they do. And others can't understand why the INTJ-A seems so emotionally unavailable during times when emotional presence matters most.
The INTJ-A's decision-making process is fundamentally different from most personality types. They decide and they move forward, not with gradual accumulation of data, not with recursive deliberation, but with decisive action based on synthesized information. This is a genuine advantage. While others analyze endlessly, the INTJ-A commits. While others seek additional input, the INTJ-A executes. This decisiveness, combined with their strategic vision, allows them to build things, create things, move initiatives forward while others are still deliberating. But this decisiveness comes with blind spots. Because the INTJ-A doesn't naturally engage in extended deliberation, they sometimes miss nuances that would emerge through that deliberation. They act on what seems like complete information, when in reality they've simply stopped asking questions, not because they've found the answer, but because their NITE process has reached resolution and moved on. The INTJ-A makes a strategic decision. They're absolutely certain it's correct. They commit all resources, but they missed a human element, an external variable. They didn't weight heavily enough, a consequence that seems obvious in retrospect, but wasn't obvious to their pattern recognition system at the time. Rather than this creating self-doubt, the INTJ-A reframes. We executed the decision correctly, the external environment shifted unpredictably. The failure gets externalized. The self remains untouched by the failure. Over time, this pattern can create what might be called confident incompleteness. The INTJ-A makes strategic decisions with high conviction, but because they don't go through extended deliberation or genuine feedback integration, they sometimes miss critical information that would have changed the decision. There's a psychological cost to never appearing weak. The INTJ-A must maintain their image of unshakable confidence. Showing genuine uncertainty, asking for help, admitting doubt, these become impossible or severely restricted. Where a more anxious personality type might bond with others through sharing vulnerability, the INTJ-A must maintain their persona of capability and confidence. This isn't performative in a dishonest sense. The INTJ-A genuinely experiences less doubt and anxiety. But it does mean that certain emotional connections become unavailable to them. The INTJ-A can't say, "I'm scared," in a way that invites others into their experience. When they express concern, it comes out as analysis. Here are the risks we need to mitigate. Others hear calculation, not fear. Others don't recognize their vulnerability because it's been translated into strategic concern. This creates a strange burden. The INTJ-A must be the strong one. They must have the answers. They must be the person others can rely on. The moment they express uncertainty, they risk the very foundation of how others relate to them. What's lost in this dynamic is mutuality. Real intimacy requires reciprocal vulnerability. The INTJ-A's confidence architecture often prevents them from offering the vulnerability that would make others feel safe offering it in return. The INTJ-A's greatest asset becomes their greatest liability precisely when circumstances require what they don't naturally offer.
genuine humility, collaborative uncertainty, the willingness to be wrong. Consider an INTJ-A in a complex team project where success actually does require integrating multiple perspectives and genuine collective deliberation. The INTJ-A's confidence-based decisiveness works against collaboration. They've already decided what needs to happen. Other team members' input is filtered through whether it supports or contradicts the INTJ-A's analysis. Or consider an INTJ-A in close relationship, where the other person needs to feel that their perspective matters, that their concerns are genuinely considered, not simply analyzed and potentially dismissed. The INTJ-A's unshakable conviction that they're right about the important decisions becomes a wall between them. Or consider an INTJ-A learning a new domain where they need to remain genuinely open to the possibility that they don't understand something. Their confidence-based assumption that if something doesn't make sense, it's probably not worth understanding becomes a barrier to learning. The INTJ-A strength, operating with certainty, deciding decisively, recovering from failure without paralysis, becomes a limitation precisely in contexts that reward doubt, flexibility, and genuine openness to being wrong.